let's talk about the Pokemon box. Alright, I put together a little slideshow, and I'm going to show you some of the stuff I've come across. I might skip right past some of the stuff you've found. This is just my take on the Pokemon box and how I'm interpreting some of it. So let's go through it. On the first page, right off the bat, I really like how New Orleans is called out in triplicate, kind of like Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. I realize that he talks about his entire trip and he's given us all the parameters and the whole circle, and it creates a really big net if you look at it that way. And seeing as how there's a lot of emphasis on these being kind of the simpler ones, supposed to be, I think this one's even, in one of his interviews, he talks about maybe even being kid-friendly in terms of just the mindset to help lock some of the dots together. So if we're thinking that way, and that's kind of what he's telling us, then to me it makes sense that something as simple as, look, here's the name of the city 1, 2, 3 times in the first few paragraphs. That seems pretty simple to me. And seeing as how the rest of the chapter depicting his actual trip talks a lot about New Orleans in particular, from the hotel to the, walking in the French Quarter and the music and the sight and the sounds and so forth. So seeing as how he's giving us so much New Orleans, I don't see any reason to fight that. I'm choosing to just go with that. I think things like this are a great initial indicator that might be where he's leading us to. And I think as we go through, hopefully I can kind of persuade you in that direction. Maybe not hopefully. If you've got a better idea, go get the box. But this is where my head's at. And I should say, I had a lot of a lot of help from my friend, RC, we'll call her, who was my personal Pokemon expert. I just kind of was a little bit older than some of the Pokemon stuff. My brother was into it, and a lot of my friends and people in the neighborhood were. I just chose to be too cool back then and kind of missed out on it. I do remember Pokemon Go and thinking, wow, that's pretty cool, even though I wasn't really into the content of the game. I remember that going on and thinking that was pretty cool. So, anyways, let's see. So let's jump. New Orleans. I'm gonna kind of skim read through some of this. It's probably gonna be annoying. Might be hard to hear me. I don't care. Just follow along on the slides, and I'll try to turn and direct my voice so you're getting the gist of what the slide is and why I think it's relevant. So, all right. He talks about the hotel accommodations. The site of the 6-story hotel might well have been the Empire State Building or the Eiffel Tower to me. I love this line for 2 reasons. One, it's a nod to the Eiffel Tower in New York, which if you caught my other video, I really think there's a lot of emphasis on New York City and Central Park for one of the box locations. The other thing is, when he's referencing the Eiffel Tower, there's actually a part of the Eiffel Tower, a restaurant that used to be, I guess, up in the Eiffel Tower, was disassembled and bought by somebody privately and brought to New Orleans, where it was a restaurant and then a few different things. I want to say Johnson Avenue. I had that written down somewhere. But so when he's referencing the Eiffel Tower, there actually was literally a piece of the Eiffel Tower recreated there in New Orleans. Then they talks about visiting the French Quarter and describes the hotel some more. Heaviest Treasure Channel. Man, that guy, he does some serious research. He's got a Pokemon video where he dives into some of the stuff in here, connecting it to a specific hotel, and boy, it's hard to argue with. I've gone in a slightly different direction. I like the Omni Royal New Orleans for its proximity to the French Quarter and some of the other attributes of the hotel, it being 6-story and having some of the views and so forth. So I haven't done nearly as much research probably on that specific location in that hotel as some of the other podcasters and channels have done. So if you haven't checked his channel out, check it out. I like his videos. I like a lot of the people's videos that are popping up. I like how how wildly different we all think. Anyways, let's keep going. I'm going to more or less skip over. Maybe I shouldn't skip over. I'll skim it. Yeah, he's describing their experience when he was younger. I'm sure people are squirming because they're knowing of things in their solve that's really pertinent right through here that I'm gonna just breeze right over. So apologies. There might be good stuff in here. I think some of the stuff points to what I'm gonna get to, but I don't have any slides or anything here where there's really anything I was wanting to illustrate with my own ideas. I feel like everything on these 2 pages just kind of speaks for itself. That's just me. Picture of the box. Everybody knows what the box looks like. I'm going to jump to an image of a sculpture in a park in New Orleans that I really like and I find really reminiscent of some of the geometry, I guess I'd call it, and maybe even some of the metals and finishes. So you look here, you can see these are sculptures in the New Orleans Sculpture Garden located in City Park, which is where I'm going to start drawing attention to one of the Pokemon bots potentially being located. I guess from here would be a good point to state that I really like 2 places in New Orleans in terms of how the solve or the story provides things that I think you would find readily available or that I've seen images of in these locations digitally, virtually, that I think, wow, I bet if I was there walking through this area, I might be able to piece this together. So it doesn't mean I've pieced it together, it just means I've found a lot of little pieces that I think pile up in these 2 park spaces that I'm going to mention. And if you're in the area, or you have a couple days to burn in New Orleans, maybe New Orleans City Park, and I really like the New Orleans Audubon Zoo as a potential too. I don't know. That one may be a little bit less so because of animals and a lot more stuff going on at a zoo that John maybe wouldn't want to interfere with, which makes a lot of sense to me. At the same time, because of some of the elements that are catching my eye, it's hard for me to flush out of my mindset. So I'll present some of it to you. Maybe some of your comments will help me go, oh yeah, there's no way it could be there because of blank. Maybe I hadn't thought of that. But anyways, all right, so let's move on. 3, switch over to 4. I'm going to show the coin. We'll go to 5. I like this. The idea of the coin representing a golf pin and flag, and the other side actually being kind of like the dimples or the texture of a golf ball. I really like this. It's simple. It's artistically, I mean, it's done well, of course, but the concept is easy, and my mind sees that really simply. It doesn't mean it's right at all, but I like this idea. I've seen other people talk about this and suggest this. Some people like it. Some people think it's kind of too silly or too whimsical, but I like it. And of course I like it because of all of the golf course emphasis at City Park, New Orleans. There's a north course, there's a south course. They probably have better names, but I think of them as the north course, the south course, and then I believe there's even mini golf courses there in the park. So let's see. Okay, if you look at topographical map view of City Park, New Orleans, it's huge. This park is massive, even bigger than Central Park, New York City. I feel like, and I should have researched this because I feel like if you Google this, it might just blatantly say, yeah, this was part of the park design. I haven't thought to do that, so pause, do it, see if it was, or ask one of the AIs or whatever. I feel like if City Park New Orleans was put together like Central Park New York City, in that all of it was designed and created, not just natural elements that were incorporated into the park. If this was created, then I find it hard to ignore that there's a large circle here and then this large waterway that goes up, and it looks to me like a flag in a cup, a lot like the coin does. Kind of like if you saw the other video I made where I feel like I can see the pick and shovel topographically in the paths and roadways and such in the park, in Central Park. I feel like I'm seeing this as another topographical marker, perhaps, for this New Orleans City Park area. Again, a city park like this is a great kind of like safe or controlled park space that's accessible to a huge populace of people. And again, when John was creating this, according to all of his interviews, this was all kind of COVID influenced. I won't say he did it because of COVID, but he does talk about a lot of the creative steps taking place during that, which was going on. So places like city parks would have been great places where people were initially kind of venturing back out into the outdoors or around others. I don't know, it's maybe just intuition. I feel like a box or two has got to be in one of these big city parks. I really like how that looks there. Another thing I would suggest or poke at is that because the shape of this is made out of a waterway, I don't know if these are all, again, if it's always full of water or if this ebbs and flows with rain water. I don't know if this is drainage or if it's part of like a permanent pond. I've seen images where some of this looks dried up and then sometimes it looks very full and this image is very connected. Other times there will be sections of it that almost look a little bit disconnected in something more like a satellite topographical. You can see here sections of this in this image are actually kind of sparse and you almost can't see that water. If this is made out of water, then this could just kind of be that glimmering, maybe this is a clue that it's glimmering the surface of water. I don't know, maybe that's kind of loose, but I like this. Here I've just highlighted that shape there so you can see it better on the satellite. Switch back over. Here you can kind of see the way the map lies out this waterway. And again, there's other stuff coming off it. I'm not saying this is exact. I just like this as a kind of Da Vinci technique or tactic. Da Vinci was known for, actually I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me jump over a few. John has a few Leonardo da Vinci references in his book, and again, I think I've said it in the other videos, I think that's because of this, something that Leonardo da Vinci was known very well for. We'll go ahead and jump ahead of myself, which is this. Back 500 some years ago, I don't know if he was the first, but he's definitely one of the more well-known people still in our time that was able to artistically render maps hired by different municipalities and people. I don't even know who all he worked for, but I know that a lot of what people still kind of scratch their head on is, well, everything. Everything Leonardo da Vinci did, people scratch their head about. But one thing of note is his cartography, his map-making abilities. And I think John might be trying to get us to think like this, or at least while we're connecting dots out of pieces of the book and we're starting to do research on our boots on the ground area, I believe John wants us to see these topographical markers. And I think this type of, again, this is Da Vinci here, this is satellite imagery, and you can see how accurate, and this is just the other half of this. Hopefully that's self-obvious, but incredible. Let me back up a couple, because there was something I wanted to note. Speaking of Leonardo da Vinci, again, I got ahead of myself, but alright. So you can see this large depiction of what I believe is noted here. And up here we've got golf course. Down here we've got South Golf Course. And then I think down here there's some mini golf courses incorporated into another part of the park down by the art museum and the botanical gardens and some of the like carousel gardens and some of the more kid-oriented parts of the park, which we'll talk about. If you shrink down here inside the circle, I think you can almost find this shape again. And I mean, there's a roundabout right here, a circular roundabout, and then this path that goes up, and it looks like another flag. I'll highlight it here. Here's the roundabout. There's this path that goes up, and then there's an actual triangle here. So it almost kind of looks like you can see that again. I find it interesting, or at least fun, that this path here is Mona Lisa Drive. I didn't make that up, that's just what it is. So that's kind of cool. I think when I was doing some research, I think I heard or read on Google that unfortunately I think a young woman lost her life here at some point. So there's stories of this Mona Lisa Drive being haunted. People in the area might correct me and go, no, you're wrong, it's some other part of the park. But I think I remember reading that the Mona Lisa Drive was a part of that story. Which might be there might be a sad story involved here. But again, the shape here of this flag is pretty neat, and it's right next to or part of the golf course right here. The Katuri, I don't know how to pronounce this, Katuri Forest right here has lots of cool walking paths. It looks like I've dropped down into first-person view and kind of meandered around all through here just to see what I could see. Can't see much. It's lots of trees and woods, but looks like a fun place to take a walk. So there's that again one more time highlighted kind of within the circle of the big version of this shape. I think you can see it again right there on the Mona Lisa Drive. And we'll come back to this spot again one more time later on as a potential kind of solve at like a pinpoint location around this area if somebody wants to go check it out. Mona Lisa Drive is just highlighting the fact that that is in fact called Mona Lisa Drive from the roundabout to what I'm calling the flag right there. Okay, so as we go on, looks like image 13 here. Alright, so here's where John is going to start to introduce us to the more specific Pokemon story, or what me and my friends started calling this the Pokemon algebra. This is where you start to have to do some conversion and kind of figure out what the key or the theory is. A couple of my channels that I enjoy watching keep kind of trying to figure out how to wrap their minds around what the algorithm is. How do you find any kind of boundaries to work with? And obviously, the meat and potatoes of it is going to be in the part where he traverses us into the world of Pokemon and kind of make-believe, which is, I think, right on theme with all of this. This is just an image of a of a Froakie or a frog in the, I think it's called Storyland area, or maybe the Carousel Gardens area, right there in Central Park, or City Park, New Orleans. Alright, let's back up one and just leave it there. Okay, so here's where some of my personal interpretive stuff is going to come into play, for sure. Because I'm not a Pokemon expert, I had to rely real heavily on my friend who had quite a bit of knowledge, and even her and I had to sit for several afternoons and kind of deep dive into some of this stuff. There's so many versions, there's so many games, and John, of course, kind of explains that and helps you understand that there's layers, there's a lot of story and imagination and tethering to all the different Pokemon worlds and so forth. So I think that's very leading. He needs you to understand that you're going to have to, if you're going to solve this, you're going to have to understand who these Pokemon are, and at least on a kind of surface level, what their parameters are, or what they like, dislike, things like that. And I'll explain, and hopefully maybe some of this will start to just slam together for people that are smarter than me. Or, like John, I think, wants some of the kids or Pokemon experts who haven't maybe given this much attention, who are going to all of a sudden go, oh, boom, 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 and associate some of these different things with what I think is potentially somewhere at the zoo, or more likely maybe here at this city park. Okay, so when we arrived at our hiking spot, the weather was sweltering. Maybe high summer heat wasn't the best time, blah, blah, blah. The air felt hotter than a Charizard's breath, but the Froakie didn't seem to mind. He told me not to worry, as it would be unlikely that we would encounter any fire Pokemon along our way. So as you might imagine, to me that just means water, right? Fire Pokemon aren't going to be a huge fan of watery habitats. Well, where's somewhere where there's a lot of water? Well, New Orleans is a great place where there's a lot of water, and if you go to this city park in particular, or the Audubon Zoo, there's water everywhere as part of the landscape. So if you're walking through the art museum or the sculpture garden outside, anyway, you can see even just from the images, the satellite images, water is everywhere in these areas. So you're supposed to be looking for an area, in my opinion, right off the bat, where there's water incorporated into the landscape. That's something you could write on the whiteboard and go, okay, well, water. We're looking for water in this area. Alright. When we get over here to the Mabosstiff, a Mabosstiff is a dog. A lot of the Pokemon are essentially, their names reflect kind of what they were created from. Sometimes it's a multitude of things, but sometimes it's real simple to look at it, and if you just look at maybe one or two, sometimes an image might be kind of skewed, but pull up some images of each different Pokemon, look at it, read about it. To us, a Mabosstiff was quite simply a dog. So I don't think this is any breaking news, but when you point to a sign, or as he's saying, we're pointing to a sign that says no Mabosstiffs, this just means that on the whiteboard you can add to the area. Not only are we looking for somewhere where there's water and ponds, but we're probably looking for somewhere where when we get in the general vicinity, we're going to see no dog signs. So add that to the list of things that we need to be clocking once we get kind of focused more down in. And remember, that's all he's doing is trying to funnel you from the broad down to the finite. So if you go too far down a rabbit hole with one specific... Right, I know, I'm not holding a box. But in my mind, and the way I hear John describe it, and what makes a lot of sense to a lot of people is, if you grab a hold of something, and I do this all the time, and you go too far with it, if you get 2 or 3 like nodes or clicks away from that thing that's in the book, you might have already lost it, because John is going step by step. He doesn't expect anybody to take huge leaps. We use our imagination to try to figure out where to start, but if you really, really stick to the book, I think the idea is that it's just wide, and each step funnels you narrower and narrower, and then maybe you get to a certain point where it's a kind of a walkthrough from there, and you get the box. Alright, so Mabosstiff, this is a dog. No dog signs. Got it. Alright. The next one is fun, and I've heard a few people reference this. I think this is way more important than some people may be giving credit. Bouffalant is obviously a buffalo, right? Okay. So as you learn about the Bouffalant and the buffalo, one of their traits, or one of their known attributes, is that they are known to charge so wildly at trains that enter their territory they would send it flying, according to their Pokemon lore. These are great big buffalo, and in the Pokemon realm or world, these things are so big and so territorial that the big fluff on their head absorbs damage as they butt these trains. And they're fighting with these trains because they view them as territorial challengers. They don't understand that the trains and train cars are inanimate objects just carrying people and goods around. I think that's funny. That's cute. All right. But why is that important? Why is he greeting us so early on in this journey with Bouffalant and making the comment? Let's see. Someone said unlikely to. And we won't see any Bouffalant either, just so you know, he added. I didn't tell him that I had already done a modicum of research before we left. So he's saying he did some research, and he's also lumping Bouffalant on right there. There's emphasis there. And what he's pointing at is this. If you learn about the Bouffalant, you learn that they hate trains. So when he's saying you are not going to see any Bouffalant around here, John's going, trust me, I know. Why would that be relevant? Well, I can tell you that, I should say, I've learned, I can't tell you from experience, but I happen to know that New Orleans is spoiled, I was going to say rotten, but let's say spoiled with trains and rail cars. Right? Think about it. Yeah, New Orleans, Mardi Gras, think about all the movies. And if you're not from there, all of a sudden you go, oh yeah, I do remember that. We think San Francisco a lot with rails, but Google it. Go look. There's rail cars and trains and rails everywhere. Then you go, oh wow. You go look on Google Images and start looking around and you go, oh my goodness. From even within, if you're talking over by the zoo, you have rails that go right there along the river and the outside of the park. You also have golf courses over there as well. But City Park, same thing. You have model train sets as part of the park. You have actual rails that go through. You have people carrying rail cars that can take you to different perimeters around these parks. You have actual freight train and rail all throughout. So to me, when he's saying you will not find any Bouffalant around here, we can put that up on the whiteboard as New Orleans certainly checks out as kind of a broad area for this description so far. There will not be any Bouffalant in New Orleans because they would be wreaking havoc on the trains. All right. There's one other thing that I want to point out that I'm seeing as a tether here, and it's that John, earlier in the chapter, talks a lot about, he's introducing the Pokemon world, and he's inviting people to explore and research it. And he's kind of demonstrating, and he's saying, hey, remember this event? Remember when Pokemon Go was going on? Well, to those who aren't in the know, it was originally this game, and there was this version, and there was this. So as you start to look into that more, he's wanting people to understand that there's layers again. You got to kind of poke around. I like this, not because I think it's a leap or a big clever solve, but because since he's choosing Bouffalant as a representative icon for, again, in my opinion, New Orleans, then another interesting attribute of the Bouffalant in the Pokemon world is that in the Pokemon Go, which was the virtual solve one, which again, he put some pretty serious emphasis on earlier in the chapter. In Pokemon Go, a Bouffalant can only be caught, according to the Pokemon websites, in New York. So again, I think he's providing another thing that points back to New York. And to me, that's another whiteboard thing. I think that helps strengthen other things. Again, these are my things, but I know I'm not the only one, pointing up there towards New York, and obviously a lot of the items and stuff having origins or their stories intertwined with that area. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's a neat kind of underlying detail on the Bouffalant, something that I think there's great importance on the Bouffalant. So let's move on. We get down to, let's see, just a little way in, I heard a rustling noise. Sorry, I know people have commented on not being able to hear me well. I don't have a mic. Hopefully you're hearing everything I'm saying. Parker's Pizza. This is located in the park, the city park. And from what I understand, Parker is the park mascot. So you're going to see a raccoon up on top of eavesdrops and the pizza place, and I know he's up on top of some of the restrooms, and train depots. So that's a pretty cool coincidence. However, he talks about a mother raccoon and her two offspring peering at him very specifically from up a large oak tree. Well, so long, Parker. At the Audubon Zoo there in New Orleans, there's actually a designated area called the Swamp Area, which it looks really cool. There's some albino alligators and some kind of unique zoo-esque type things that would be cool to go see. But what I think is neat is this is one of the few zoos that's incorporating what most of us normally find digging through the trash can or scurrying into the sewer as you drive by, raccoons. There's actually a raccoon, what am I trying to say, enclosure or attraction at the Audubon Zoo. So you could be walking through this narrative and see no dog signs. There's trains and rails, like I said, so there's not going to be any bouffalante around. And then as you get down, coming into the swamp area, actually coming across a raccoon, potentially a mother up one of these trees. I don't know which one of them might be an oak tree, but so that's pretty cool. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that this, my solve is where one of these boxes are, but maybe this will help your mind start going, you know, or branch off any which one of these little shoots and go with it. I'm not there, I'm not anywhere near New Orleans, so maybe this helps somebody else go get one of these boxes. Alright. Raccoon up the tree. Come on. It's like he's narrating it right there for you at the zoo. Alright, then he gets down to, what's another one I like? So we got a few raccoon images. This image where he says, as I walked, the path became increasingly shaded. This helped with the heat. The landscape in front of me now was mysterious and hauntingly gorgeous. Almost any of these park spaces that I've mentioned, the zoo in particular and some of the entryways and some of its big grand trees and City Park, these huge, I think they're angel oaks or live oaks, and they are all dripping with Spanish moss. And to me, if that's not, he said, I misquoted, he said hauntingly gorgeous. To me, that's hauntingly gorgeous. Then he's going to rattle off, and he's going to introduce us to some of these very specific Pokemon. But you'll notice that these very specific Pokemon are all kind of on theme. We've got Crickettoons, which are crickets. We've got Yanmas, which are more or less dragonflies. Ladybugs. Heracross or rhinoceros beetles, or Hercules beetle. Maybe it's a Hercules beetle. I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure all of these Ninjasks, which I want to say are cicadas. What else? And then the Pheromosa. All of these insects are definitely insects you would see and would be local to these areas. Okay, I don't know about the exotic white cockroach per se, but at the zoo and in the, some of these enclosure areas, I almost imagine, and again, I haven't visited these zoos, I've tried to watch some of the walkthroughs on YouTube to see what kind of critters I could see as they go through, to see if these all line up specifically. I can't really find anywhere where they line up exactly, but again, I'm not there. So I like how the insects fit into these environments kind of naturally, but as they get a little bit exotic, I can also see them being incorporated into these areas, like at the zoo, where not only would there be the outdoor insects in the outdoor exhibits, but also if you go into some of the indoor aquarium and terrarium areas and stuff, you might see some of the more exotic insects and Pokemon that he's describing for us. Okay, then we get down to, I continued on some ways more. I wished the Froakie hadn't left, although the path was increasingly hemmed in. I was quite worried I might lose him. I decided to stop for a drink. I sat on a rock in the midst of it all. I've found images of different statues and stuff where here it looks like a frog actually spitting up water or taking a drink. I will also point out that this frog is either in the mini golf course or is at a mini golf course that I haven't mentioned at all in this video. I have to point out that there's one or two images in this slideshow that I don't think are at the zoo or at the park, the city park that I'm talking about. This might be one of them, or this might be located at the mini golf course. Do your own research. There are a couple images in here that aren't at either of these parks, so if you base any of this on that, you won't find it. Maybe City Park might be a neighboring mini golf course somewhere there in New Orleans. I don't remember exactly. I have it, but again, it's the idea where you're converting what he's saying into something that you might actually be looking at the park, going, oh, if in the story he sat on a rock to have a drink, well, look, there's a frog statue on a rock, and it looks like he's spitting up water, so you could interpret that as like a drink. Just kind of an idea, maybe not an exact location, but just a way to kind of interpret the landscape, or maybe the park, the statue, the creatures. Maybe it's live. Maybe some of these things are inanimate. Maybe they're statues or artistic elements as part of kids' rides or parts of the park. You get it. All right. Again, here in Storyland, I think it's called, there in the middle of City Park, there's a part of this walkthrough where there's a mermaid, and the young mermaid is sitting on a rock in the middle of it all, or in the middle of a lot of the walk spaces, and she's sitting there gazing out, and I think you can walk quite a ways around her. So if something like that decided to stop for a drink, I sat on a rock in the middle of it all, that visual depiction kind of lines up with how you might be seeing a statue where there's somebody sitting on the rock right there. So, I don't know, an interesting coincidence, again, there in the park. Another statue there in the park where you have a woman sitting in the middle on a rock with water flowing. Again, not an exact lineup of the description, but you can see how different versions of these things might fit or might be. They may not all be exact, right? Like, John's put so many different things together here. Some of them might be really strong and obvious, and some of them might be a little more interpretive. And we would all love for there to be a really consistent tether or system through each one of these boxes. And there might be. I don't know if any of this is accurate, but I'm interpreting these as genuine and real world. He didn't ask AI to create these. This is a mashup of John's ideas, and then he's utilized different tools and things to bring it together, but following the creative path of one guy. Why in the world would there be some kind of perfect formula? I don't think it'll work like that. I think part of the fun is getting into the idea of the empathy of learning another's journey, another path, and kind of following something instead of just blindly following your own creative logic, which is fun and maybe where invention and different things come from. But this is a specific map, a specific trajectory we're supposed to follow. So, holy smokes, let's move on. In Storyland Park, there's parts in there where there's like an artificial stone walkway where you're walking, and it's meant to feel as if you're walking on stones across a pond or whatnot. I've got really bad images of it here that I've dug up. Again, these are all just Google images. I have not cited any of them. Please don't sue me. But you can see here a user has posted so you can kind of see if this was all flooded with water, you and the kids and the family, as you walk across this, it feels like you're in a very natural environment where you're walking across. So he kind of mentions that down here where he talks about he hopped from one rock to another. There's also areas in the park where, and this is fun too, because this is specifically a Japanese garden, a Japanese themed Zen garden as part of, I think it's part of the botanical garden, but it's kind of in between where the botanical garden is there in City Park and the art museum just a little further to the east there. as you move towards the Storyland and Carousel Gardens and come more towards the kids area and the model train part, there's this Japanese garden where some of the attributes of this park kind of match up with this. Anywhere where he's saying, I hopped from one rock to another and landed with a thump. A lot of this garden area are stone walkways. And of course, you know, this is a Japanese garden, so how on theme is that with the Pokemon and his time in Japan with his wife and so forth. So here's more illustrated of these stone walkways, which would kind of line up with this journey as you're walking, or hopping. Let's see what he says. He hopped from one rock to another. Hop, hop, hop. I like that. Especially because this, and again, this is another user Google image, but you, as you walk through this park space, if you're following through the story, you would be hopping from one rock to another as you walk through here. So I like that. Might not be this spot, but that might be a way to look for what you're doing. Again, if this is kid-oriented, or the one that's kind of supposed to maybe be the whole family fun, it might be as simple as that. As you read through and your boots on the ground, as you read this story, you might be acting it out as you're following the kids around the park. We haven't really gotten there yet, but in this Japanese garden area, there's this very large stone back in this window. I don't know anything about Japanese culture. I don't know what this is, what this represents. I do know, however, that when they reference a golem later on, I did a lot of research into different stone golems and the traditional idea of a Jewish golem from story and lore versus the Pokemon version of golem, which we'll talk about in a second. But before we move past the Japanese garden, I love how there's this big stone, which to me kind of looks wise, but this big stone figure pointing up into this tree. Is this a golem? I don't know. Not really by either definitions we'll talk about in a little bit, but there it is anyways. Check it out for yourself. Okay, let's see. I didn't talk a whole lot about, or I didn't provide any slides, I should say. I'd like to talk about the swamp art, or at least the way it's spelled in my book, and I don't know if this has been one of the correction in one of the revisions or not, but swamp art, the way Pokemon spell it versus swamp art, I find different. I should probably just zip it right there, because this really might be something that's been already discussed and fixed, but if not, I have an idea of where you can find some swamp art on a wall in one of these locations, which kind of fits in, but we'll move past that because I didn't provide any slides for it anyways. I've already be past all of that. I like how this looks a bit like a torn admission ticket, which would be kind of on point with any of these park spaces. I think you're going to pay admission for some of these. Maybe not the city park areas, but for some of the areas we would. Maybe some of the rides, some of the park locations and stuff, I do believe you'd pay and get a, I don't know if you actually get a ticket anymore, but to me that's fun. Is that the outline of this anyways kind of looks like a little torn admission ticket. Alright, let's get down to where it kind of comes down to some of the maybe more specific solve location stuff. I don't have too many, but I know this is dragging way on. Magikarp, those last ones is where he references Magikarp conversing with Sea Kings. When you look into Magikarps and Sea Kings, you'll see, to me, what looks like the kinds of koi and decorative fish and stuff, which would be, again, this is Cape Escape Adventure Golf. This is one of those images I was talking about. These fish are not in the park locations that I'm, just the zoo or the city park, but they might be. I didn't find any images of them, but as you're there walking through, maybe you're looking for these kinds of fish when he's referencing the Magikarp and the Sea King. Perhaps decorative koi or some kind of fish incorporated into the landscape around you as you go through. Or maybe they're more decorative. Maybe they're, you know, small artistic fish on rides, on drinking fountains, on something that you would see and go, oh, okay. I think the modality of a lot of these clues will switch because that's how the real world is. It's hard to apply one specific thing. And if you research like old treasure hunting stuff and like the way people used to hide symbols and stuff, and knock pieces of rock out of stuff to point or look like an animal head, and it requires a lot of patience and perceptiveness to the environment around you. And that again is totally on point with John's idea of getting people out into nature and learning and understanding about all of our park spaces and the way in which we're spoiled with resources here. It's beautiful everywhere, but our park spaces and stuff, what a cool thing to push people out to go do, right? Alright, so when he talks about, when he says very specifically, the forest opened up, there's a location as you come around the bend out of the swamp area in the Audubon Zoo, where there's this sign, the Wood Eternal and the Cypress Lumber Industry, and they're nodding. The swamp area in the zoo is very, I believe, kind of, it's meant to be representative of New Orleans and genuine swamp culture and lifestyle and tools and trade and so forth. So they have a nod to the cypress lumber industry. They have this massive wood saw blade here from like a wood mill, and then there's this big readout on where you can read about this industry and how it pertains to that area. Of course, the main feature is the big cypress trees that grow in the swamp around this area. So when the quote or the line is the forest opened up, it's kind of sad, I guess, if you're into trees, but here's literally a spot where the part of the tree or the forest is opened up. It's splayed open and on display for you to see. So is that what he means by the forest opened up? Or is he being more literal and it's just a dense tree area that opened up more above him? The comment right after that where he says an eagle greeted us from high above, I sure like that for a golf term, maybe more towards City Park where there's golf courses everywhere, and an eagle would be a great shot under par, right? So, I don't know, different ways to interpret these clues, of course, but I'm seeing a pile up of potentials around this area, and with the big heavy nods to New Orleans in the beginning of the book, I think some of these park spaces fit the bill, but who knows? Oh, there's another one of those images of this golf place. I don't know anything about that, but mini golf is great. Go check that out. Okay, here's an image of the golem. So when he says the Greninja introduced me to a wise golem. So this is a Pokemon version of a golem. When you go down to the data and you learn about the Pokemon through these Pokemon indexes and read about the name origin, a golem is also references a Jewish, I keep saying Jewish, I mean that with all due respect, that's just how I'm remembering I believe it's Jewish folklore, where the golem is again, I know there's stories and a lot more to this, no disrespect, I'm summarizing, a stone or kind of featureless, some of them I think are kind of like clay, or some of them are more stone, but they're human-like, kind of human-figured, but not full-featured, not like us. It's not a person. It's like not a doll though either. Boy, I should have hit this with a little more research. But there's a lot of statues and features and things in the park that would, and I'll demonstrate some of those, that would represent a human-like feature made of stone that could fit the definition of a golem that you might introduce as you're walking through, or that you might encounter, I mean, as you're walking through one of these park spaces. However, excuse me, and my friend RC and I argue on this. She's very set in the description provided, and I argue that that kind of a lot of the Pokemon algebra or lore to me points back to the Pokemon creature itself having a tether to an actual animal. So while the golem is and this version is made of stone and very heavy, and that makes sense with the Jewish golem figure being a stone, very strong. I think sometimes they were portrayed as protectors, and maybe sometimes as a bit as antagonists, but always portrayed as solid and dense, heavy. So this Pokemon golem matches that, as it looks like it's made out of stone. But to me, for my money, I want to tether it to a turtle or a tortoise, which is super on point for like old treasure hunty stuff. Turtles were oftentimes used as markers and location markers and symbols for treasure related endeavors. So I like the golem being portrayed as a tortoise. And again, another item, I'll skip forward now. This is a tortoise sculpture in the sculpture garden there in New Orleans. And it's obviously looking specifically at something. It might be worth checking out if a wise golem or tortoise is looking right at a location on your journey, and he has a great idea about where you could hide the treasure. I also like, and here in a second, when he says right after that, we circled back. Well, tell me a tortoise doesn't have circles all over its back. Maybe a fun play on words there. Or, oh, and just to illustrate, of course, there's tortoises all over the zoo, like tortoise signs, actual tortoises. I mean, there's tortoises. There's tortoise play things incorporated in part of Storyland, different tortoise in the hair things that you can find. Tortoise related exhibit signs where there's turtles depicted facing certain ways or talking about a turtle that goes fishing, maybe talking about part of an exhibit that you might see right around the bend where there's like an imitation little fishing stand. The zoo, there's lots of areas where some of this fits, and then there's little areas of water and stuff, some of which it looks like you can even get fairly close to. But there's alligators and snapping turtles, so I don't know how any of that tracks in the real world. But I do see on Google Images and some of these walkthroughs where you could hide a box. Another tortoise statue. This one's funny. I don't know if this one fits into any of the descriptions, but this one has a couple people on it, and they're of course actually pointing. I don't see a box there, so I don't know if this is one worth pursuing. But the idea of looking for a golem, which might actually be represented by a tortoise, my friend RC would argue in this other direction. These are some of the sculptures I'll show you in the sculpture garden, where to me this could very definitely be representative of the more traditional Jewish lore of a golem, of a human figured, very large, either protector or antagonist golem. And there's probably specific story and more attributes that would make certain people go, nope, that could never be a golem for this specific reason. I don't know how well any of that relates, because we have to remember that John put this together. So maybe there's diehard rules on certain things where certain people would never put A and B together, but would John? I don't know. None of us know yet, but I see a lot of elements that work in these park spaces. So here's a few more golem statue examples that you can find there in the sculpture garden. Some of them even having outstretched hands. I know he talks about shaking hands with the golem. More statues. Human-like figure elements that are kind of more faceless. They don't really represent a human specifically, but they have human features and kind of depict a movement like a golem might. This one, again, no disrespect, this is a statue of a Native American, so I'm not tethering this to a golem, but it's another idea where there's this one I think is actually made out of stone, which is why I liked it, and I don't know why it's coming in so blurry right now. But here's a statue where he references a wise golem, where I'm seeing a human figure depicted made out of stone, like a traditional golem. That this Native American might be representing someone who is very wise and is made of stone. I don't really see a golem tether there. He doesn't look like a tortoise. So you can see how some of these are kind of loose, but maybe you'll have a good idea. This one's cool. This is Moses, actually depicted out of stone. So there's some pretty obvious tethers. Him not being a golem, but of the Jewish tether and being made of stone. He's very specific. He's not featureless. He's Moses. But I can see some hard connections there, and this is located, I think, in part of the Botanical Gardens walkthrough in City Park, New Orleans. So I really like that. When he says, we circled back and then we left the box not far from a place where locals turn up from time to time. There's a Ferris wheel at the Carousel Gardens in City Park, and it makes me think of when you get onto a Ferris wheel, I'm pretty sure you get on and then they rotate backwards, and of course it goes in a big circle. So if they circled back, to circle back might be circling back in a big Ferris wheel. That's in the location, in the park there. So when he's saying we circled back and left the box not far from a place where locals turn up from time to time, well, you'd certainly be circling back and turning up in a Ferris wheel. Just a way to interpret it. Doesn't mean that's the right solve, but maybe these are the play on words that he's using. What's another idea I had? So there's the Ferris wheel again, another image of the Ferris wheel at the park. This one's a little dark or macabre, but there's a in the zoo, as you're coming around the bend in the swamp area, there's lots of cool depictions, like I said, of the natural bayou and swamp parts of New Orleans. I've never had the good fortune of going for a visit, but in this particular podium and readout, again, this is at the zoo, you can find these images. And again, I'm not sure why these are coming in so blurry. On my tablet down here, they're crystal clear. They're beaming up to the TV, and it's kind of iffy. But there's a section of a burial here, of a small cemetery. What's probably like an old family plot would be. I don't think this is real at the zoo, but they're showing you a demonstration or a depiction of how you might find this out in the swamp. And they talk about an unfortunate reality, which is that a lot of people buried in pine boxes because of the water tables and such. A lot of the burials, as it is today, are above ground in Louisiana and in these areas. But in some of the more traditional backwooded areas, they would do their best, but over time, it talks about how these pine boxes would literally float up. And so, as it's kind of dark and disturbing, and I hate to think that way, and I really don't think John would be thinking this way, this is kid-related, but because it's part of the walkthrough at the zoo, it is kind of funny to think of locals. We left the box not far from a place where locals turn up from time to time. That's kind of dark. But as you walk through this area right here, you're on a bridge, and that's something to note. The reason I like this spot is because a lot of the other elements kind of work through that swamp area at the zoo, and then you come across this spot where you'd kind of be reading, as he talks about locals turning up from time to time. You're on a little bridge, and there is a little bit of a water area right underneath you. Could there be a box tucked right under this bridge right here, or right along this little section of this swamp pathway? I don't know. Having never been there, I'm not sure how much space there is on some of these walkways between you and actual alligators and snapping turtles. I really don't think John would be encouraging people to go towards these areas that you're not allowed to walk into. So if you could reach down right there and maybe grab a box under that little bridge, if the area around you is more or less pretend and there's not actual creatures there, then it'd be a great place to hide a box. Outside of that, I don't think places like that at the zoo really work because of the danger element and because of respect for the staff and crew who are there primarily taking care of the animals and allowing us to come view that. So I like how this spot fits. It's more or less kind of a demonstration of how you might be looking to wordplay and how creative, since we're all as creative as we are with our different solves, John has that license too. So who's to say what what this means for sure. We don't know yet, but I have one more idea. Actually, I have two more ideas. I forgot about this one. Another strange thing on this walkthrough, this is called a wellhead, or other referred to as a Christmas tree. Anybody in the well industry or oil industry will know what this is. I have some friends, what's up, Brian, who understand what this is, and it's part of an industrial well situation. Boy, is that a horrible description. The point is, right as you're coming through this swamp area, again at the zoo, they have one of these as you're walking through, and I think it's because these must be prevalent in certain areas in the swamp and the bayou where either modern day oil extraction is going on, or these are caps of past oil extraction. I think it's oil. It could be natural gas or other things. I don't know if it matters or if there's different versions, but they have one of these here, and the sign, which you can't read here because it's too blurry, says a 10-ton steel Christmas tree. So this thing is massive, and it raises way up above a visitor as you walk through, and then it talks about how they're used and what they're for, and it's something that is used to adjust and lock, of course, the pressure of said fluid or gas down in the ground. I would imagine, because it's covered, and it's so hard to see, but there's big wheels all up and down this on all these different portions of this. So I think that's kind of funny, that he left the box not far from a place where locals turn up from time to time. Is he talking about, is it right here? I can see waterways right here, and again, if there's alligators right here, then and maybe a rope, then of course you can't go back there. But if this is just kind of part of this make-believe scenery where some of these things are presented for us to see, then is the box like right here? Is he talking about, is this thing where a place where locals would turn up from time to time? Are they talking about turning these wheels? Again, maybe not here, but maybe something to think. All right, last one. I want to go back to way earlier when we talked about the city park topographical, and I pointed out Mona Lisa Drive and what looks like a little triangular flag in the circle down here. So you've kind of got the flag and the cup symbol on the coin. If you go, I've got this set up split screen right now. If you go to the very point of where that flag is, here's Mona Lisa Drive, and then right at the point, and again, the coin only has the downstroke, so this doesn't really perfectly represent the coin because this has what looks like the full flag, a full triangle. But if you go right to where the point of that triangle is, right here, and you go down into first-person view, you will find a swing. That's certainly a place where locals could turn up, and you can walk along this as part of the tree forest area, not necessarily part of the golf course, but what a great place to hide something. And you've also got water features right around here. So could this be part of the park area, perhaps where the box is hidden? You know, I should jump all the way back to the very beginning and point out one thing, just for fun. This waterway right here, I don't have any slides of this, but since we're about done with the video, I'll say, at this waterway, at this golf course, I think it's hole 1 or 2, I don't remember, but there's a great big tree that kind of leans out over this pond. I found a bunch of images of it that are really pretty. The tree kind of stands alone, and it's essentially right at the very tip, wink, of that element that comes down, or that little angle off the coin, if this matched up. So could that whole thing be pointing right at that tree that kind of hangs over the water on hole 1 or 2 right here on this golf course? I don't know. If anybody golfs this area, somebody go have a cigarette or a soda and poke around this tree. Look all up and around that tree. See if there's not something hanging in that tree on that golf course right where that waterway kind of points to. I should have put a slide of that image on there, but you can find it. The last thing I'll say is as the afternoon rolled into early evening, sadly it became time to leave. To me that means you're somewhere that has a closing time. He didn't say as the afternoon rolled into early evening, I got hungry, or we had. There's nothing indicating that it was his choice to be done for the day. It says, as afternoon rolled into early evening, comma, it sadly became time to leave. So I think again on the whiteboard you can write down a closing time, somewhere that closes probably, afternoon into early evening. What does that mean? 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock? A lot of these park spaces, especially some of the kid-oriented one or the art museums in different places, have that closing time for the city workers and park workers of right around 5 or 6 p.m. So again, I think him indicating that this adventure came to a close around that evening hour or 5 p.m. is another thing you can put on the whiteboard for things that you need to lock in, because he's telling you that. That's not something you have to imaginatively tether. He's telling you this location closes. And on that note, I'm going to close this presentation because even I can't stand the sound of my voice anymore. I hope some of this helps. Somebody go find a box, please. Good night. Good luck. God bless. Bye.